Yeah. I'll let you.
Right, I think that's us on live, and yes, I think that's all working fine. I think so.
Hello.
Hello there. Hello, how you doing?
How you doing, Paul? What's up,
Not
buddy?
bad at all. Yeah, absolutely fine. And we've got a lady in the house, so you're going to have to watch your language, dude.
Hi, everybody. It's Rubber Ducky. How are you?
Yes, I was going to say we've got Rubber Ducky with us, and first of all, I'd like to issue a groveling apology for the fact that when it came to Mammothon, we had like a group chat sort of messenger page, and I said I mentioned you and assumed that everybody else were going to get you to join them on their channel, but in actual fact it should have been me that should have invited you, so I do apologize for that, and it would have been great to have had you join on the Mammothon live thing, but we're making reparations now by having you on, because I think I've followed your channel, basically YouTube channel, since it first started. I'm a regular on your Discord chat group. I believe, well, I don't believe, on my phone I've got a Discord app, and it's got two chat places on there.
Right.
It's got one called it's one called the well, hold on a sec. It's got one called RD Puddle Room, and then it's got another one called Cozy Wrecking Crew. So those are the two that I listen out for and watch.
You're not in Scooby School, dude?
Not yet. No.
We gotta get you invited into Scooby School.
Oh, right, okay. And, but also,
hey, actually, before you go any further,
yeah, go on.
Ducky, I actually am in a bit of a quandary here. How long ago did you start?
Actually, I did not start, I believe, until January or February, I'd have to say, of this year on YouTube.
Okay, so you kind of did start up recently.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Our channel is very, very new. We've been in the case for a long time, but as far as the Rubber Ducky channel, we're still, cutting our teeth here. I grabbed my phone and just started talking, and that's how I got started. So it's been an amazing journey of support and just an adventure in itself, and digging deeper into the case.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I was just curious. I know, because everybody talks about you've been around since back in 2016, but I wasn't sure about your channel, so I guess that answers that question. So.
Well, I did have a channel. I did show my face, and unfortunately back then, Manitowoc was not preoccupied, and they did start coming to my hometown. So that got uncomfortable for me, and I got off all media sources. And I decided recently that all the study that I've done and all the research I've done since then, I've stayed with the case completely. We needed to approach it differently, and that was, rather than just talking, I needed to provide documents and stuff and follow Zellner's footprint, so that I didn't, start a new topic and bring up things that somebody else hadn't already popped the bubble on. So we follow in footsteps to share awareness about Brendan and Stephen. And so far, so good. We're doing really amazing, and a lot of people are sharing a lot of love on the channel.
Awesome.
I do apologize for that. Have I done that right now, or do I need to actually mute it? Yes. There you go. There you go, dude. I've actually managed to do what you asked me to do a long time ago. I've actually got on one side, I've got all my chats coming up, and I can go back to my Google Hangouts, and I can see you there. And then I can go to this, and I've got me there, but delayed. So you've got two big screens in your room, but I've actually got two screens on my computer.
You have to switch between tabs. Yeah, annoying, isn't it?
Well, but they've done a good job of fitting new shelves and cupboards in my computer, so I've got more storage.
Dude, it's a computer, not a freaking pantry. All right. Well, anyways. Sorry.
Anyway,
Rubber Ducky. He likes to make that joke about his computer. I just had to say that. Anyways.
And notice I've tied it up.
Yes.
Yeah, if you look carefully, that there's no debris on the table here. I thought I better try and make a good impression here. So
And you
that's
didn't bust out the strobes? Oh wow.
well.
They're
They're over there. They're over there, ready to go.
Over there. Anyway,
I was going to ask you. You've got this Discord chat group, which I go to, but also you've got a special library that you started up as well.
Yeah. In bringing public awareness, a lot of the times when we we have like two waves of people. We have those that are from the first ma'am, and those people have had to cut their teeth by finding the documents themselves. And a lot of them have really learned a lot of information that way.
Mm-hmm.
However, the second wave of individuals on ma'am 2, they came in kind of at a deficit that they didn't know where to look for documents. And a lot of people didn't take the time to show them. And it's hard to reach all those people one at a time. So our group decided that if we could collect documents and put them in one source, and make it an interactive place to be where they could actually expand maps up and have a map room or learn about those individuals that were in law enforcement from the 1985 case, as well as the 2005-2007 case, and them being the same players in some cases, they might be able to connect more dots and they could read it firsthand.
As well as the 2005-2007.
Oh, I hear myself. That's horrible.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
There we go. Sorted.
So what we did is we started gathering all of the documents off our computers that we've saved for years.
Yep.
And we began to compile them into the cloud. But what we found was wonderful is that we could get a website and we could put all the things in place that were beautiful to look at and interact with, but that we didn't have to constantly maintain that site because we could just put our stuff in the cloud, connect the cloud. And so the library gets updated every single day, actually. Things get added. Sometimes about once a week, over 200 documents get added. And so it's consistently building. And the great news is that it is a huge amount of storage there. And we've only tapped into about, I think it's 200 of a percent of what we can use.
Yep.
So it can be unlimited. It does cost us. The library does cost a little bit to run. It's about a little under $30 a month for me. But at the same time, the channel does pay for that. So that's why we do monetization, to run background checks, FOI documents, pay for those kind of things. So that's where a lot of the donations go to and so forth.
Yeah, I mean,
cool.
You were saying also, because we had a little chat before we got fired up. You were saying about the fact that you originally started your YouTube channel and you were, as you were saying, doing it straight from your phone and chatting in, but then talking in, and then you decided to start doing the PowerPoint presentations, and I think that was when, it looks very impressive, and it is very impressive that you're able to present all these documents. And at the moment, I believe you're in the process of going through page by page the CASO documents, all sort of 1,200 pages.
Well, yeah, there's 1,117,
Right.
and I actually was going to read it anyway, and I had actually picked a different thing than the CASO. So I had picked I wanted to know the pre-trial, which I'm still doing. I'm doing that on my own. And I do find some huge discrepancies between the witnesses that testify in pre-trial versus what they do in the real trial. Complete contradictions in many cases. However, I suggested to a lot of the ducks, I'm like, hey, what if I went online? So many people are driving on trips, or they travel for their job, or they're just like me, they're doing housework, want background information. What if I read these? And they said, it would be amazing if you just do the CASO reports. And I said, oh my gosh, we'll be here for 10 months. Are you serious? There's no way. And they said, I bet you could do it. And I said, well, you know what? We're going to give it a try. So I am proud to announce that we have not missed a day, and we are nearing the end of 250 pages this week. So that's quite exciting. We do 10 pages at a time. It takes anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. And after we do the read through, what we do is we go back through it, highlight everything that, even if it's just a point we want in our mind on the whiteboard for something future to refer back to, or it's something that we just don't understand, or it absolutely makes no sense. Now, we have caught a couple, I'd say out of 250 pages, we've caught one thing that's very peculiar. We'll be doing a movie next week on that. But then there's also been a lot of things to where you have one investigator giving his report that was there, and his partner at the time giving his report much later. And what it's allowing us to do is compare the two reports and find out how two different eyewitnesses that are in law enforcement tell two different stories, including the date, including the time it happened, including location is different. So it's really bringing, I guess, the best part of the entire event is it's kind of like looking at the investigation itself from a historic point and seeing where they've done it wrongly. How can we improve on a law enforcement standpoint? How can we improve our system on the Wisconsin State Crime Lab? How can we improve our system? And based on these investigative reports, I've already found out so much information. One of the things that we've learned is that the State Crime Lab, and this has been all very, very important to the case, and anybody that's wrongfully convicted should probably be aware of this, as well as those that haven't been on Avery Road yet in their life. And that's that our state crime lab does not benefit if the person is found not guilty. They actually only get paid when they find the person guilty in court that they have done the testing for. So it does create somewhat of a biased feeling that they're going to have to find a person guilty to get funding. And, you know, that in itself, and then they don't do blind testing. So they're aware of the person's name. They may be aware of the person's history, that if they've been found guilty of a crime prior, they should also, most of the time, they are made aware of that. And then, you know, if you look at the direct case relationship, you look at Fassbender saying to Sherry Culhane, not, you know, try and see if you can find her in this area, but put her.
Yes.
Find her would be something I could live with. I could say, well, let's find her in the garage. Let's see if you can find her in the house. Find the victim's DNA anywhere. But that's not what Fassbender says. And the problem with that is the special agents that work for that area are actually the trickle down funding from their system is what funds the crime lab.
Dude, I've got a question, if you don't mind, and I'll go first, unless you've got something pressing.
Okay, hold on just 1 second though.
Yeah.
Rubber Ducky, did you just say that the crime lab technicians, was that who you were talking about? That you said they only get paid if the whatever the
Prosecution
is found guilty?
So they get
that is a serious problem. That's
they
a serious motivation for crime lab technicians. I mean, that's ridiculous. I'd love to see the proof on that. That'd be
the way
awesome.
It works is the crime lab gets an X amount of funding automatically.
Right.
But there's always an unknown amount of budgeting that they're going to receive. Now, the way it works is back in 2005, I believe it was $12 that they would receive on an individual if that individual was found guilty and they had done the testing. So that still holds true today. I don't know how much it is today. I would assume a little bit more.
Right,
I've always kind of wondered, what did they get for finding Steve Avery guilty? You know, when they got the word back that he was guilty. But yeah, that is an absolute true statement. And yeah, you can look that up. And then not to do blind testing. That's another issue I have. Is I believe when you have two individuals, one a suspect, one a victim, that we have several crime labs in the state of Wisconsin. And not only do I believe we should have third-party audits of our crime labs on a regular basis, at least annually, if not every 6 months or quarterly, just like a food plant that guarantees the safety for human beings to eat, they cannot investigate themselves. We have to have third-party investigators come in and do
Right.
what's called an audit. We don't have that in the crime lab. The crime lab actually is investigated by the state of Wisconsin, which is the state of Wisconsin
Right.
basically is part, it's all the same.
Yeah.
So without, if you have a victim and you have a suspect, DNA does not just stick on that spot. That's where it's always going to be. DNA can actually transfer very easily from one thing to another, and you can get a very nefarious situation if the person's already got incentive to have a conflict of interest, if they're going to get paid more because they find somebody guilty, if
Right.
they're getting pressure to put her in a place rather than find her in a place.
Yep.
And
Right.
so with all the crime labs, why can't it be, and I want Americans to all look at this. Why can't we put some sort of law in there where all the victims' DNA or evidence goes to a separate crime lab in Wisconsin or in their own state, and then all the suspects goes to another, and we have two different individuals or teams working on individual stuff, and that would be a lot fairer for us, in the long run. And I think we'd have less of this wrongful conviction thing.
Mm.
Yeah, I like the idea of the whole third party, inspections, whatever you want to call it, right? But I guess the rub is how do you establish that entity that does the that does the inspections? Because essentially, who's going to create it? Well, some politicians in Wisconsin are going to create it, and then they're going to get people in Wisconsin who may be already inclined, like many there are, to think a certain way. So it's like, and I've been thinking about this in a bigger way, but this is actually a small little thing where we can talk about this. How do we get impartial people that are not going to be, able to be bullied, bribed, vexed, whatever, so that they just do their job and they're going to just be fair? I mean, that's the problem, I think in life, is that humans are so fallible. How do we get people into that position that we can then have faith in?
Well, I thought that's what Dean and Jerry with their Center for Integrity
CIF.
for forensic science. I thought that's
Center,
what they
Center for Integrity of Forensic Sciences, right?
Yes,
CIF.
yeah, I'm sure that's what they are hoping to do.
It'd be nice. I mean, I'm all for the CIFS. I mean, I've done a couple videos about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we need. I mean, David Rudolph touched on this in Australia as well. When I went and saw David Rudolph, he talks about how these judges need education. They need to understand, more about the science or about the particular sciences that kind of get brought into the courtroom on a regular basis, and they need to understand what's foul or not proper, and what is. And they just aren't. They're not. I mean, they're judges, not scientists. So the problem is we have all these, for lack of a better word, bookworms trying to decide, what science is just and what isn't. And David Rudolph goes to the point of saying, and I even set up seminars. I set up, teaching sessions, or whatever, like for, for these judges to come and just hear a seminar given by some scientists about how to differentiate between junk science and good science and stuff. They won't even bother. They won't even accept his invitation. They just basically say, no, thanks. They don't care. And as long as we have this situation where our judges don't care to improve themselves and make our courtrooms better places and more factual, I mean, hey, if they don't care, who's gonna?
Well, I think I personally agree with you 100% that it is just an uphill climb. When we look back, and this is 20 years ago, everybody smoked cigarettes, and they were smoking. There were nurses that were smoking right at the desk while they wrote down about the patient and so forth. But it really came from the people themselves not tolerating it anymore. And that's what we've got to do. So I commend you, Erekose, for doing what you do and getting online and constantly working for public awareness. Education to the public is probably the most powerful tool that the media has allowed us to do through YouTube, through Twitter, through Discord, and other things. And we're both on the same goal, 100% on the same page. I agree with you. But we need to continue, because at some point, I think there was a couple people that probably said, how in the world would we get it to where we don't have secondhand smoke at work? That would be going up against multi-billion-dollar narcotic salespeople, because we are dealing with nicotine and lead and all this. And it was all over the place that, cigarettes were allowed. And we had to get to a point to where 20 years later, we can't even smoke on the property of a hospital. You can't even smoke anywhere. If you're a smoker, you go to the end of the block on a cold winter day, and that's your problem. So we have to change the mindset, and that's what you do every time you get on here.
Right.
And like I said, hats off to you for staying with it as long as you have. There are days when I honestly, I do want to keep my chin up, but there are times when I feel like we're just a drop in the ocean of this corruption. But then I get wonderful days like this when I get to jump on with you guys. And I realize, we make bigger waves than we even realize sometimes in what we do. And so we've just got to bond together, and we've got to do this to where people know they have the power. We can vote. And it's hard. It's hard to, and I'm just going to say it, to me, politics is picking a dirty turd out of a dirty bucket. You just try to pick the one that's not as nasty. But in that, we somehow over the years have managed as people to get people to control their smoking around our children. We've changed laws where children are required to be seat belted in the car now, compared to when we were all kids and we ran around the back seat like monkeys. So we just got to stay at it as the best way I can think about it, and keep our chin up and be aware that we're making a difference every day. And public awareness that the labs are run like this.
Yeah, very much so, yes. What I was going to ask, my question was to do with the investigation into the disappearance of Teresa Holbach. I've only ever called it a disappearance because we just don't know what happened to her. Although I'm not saying that, I believe with this, Teresa is still alive and out there. The fact that there's this blood in the back of the RAV4 and apparently it's hers, that would suggest that some harm certainly did come to her. But my question would be this, and I'll put this to both of you. Was the investigation poorly done by accident or deliberate? Or was it a case of it started off as being poorly done by accident and then became deliberate? I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. Ladies first.
I was kind of hoping Eric would take this one. That's a difficult question. Eric, would you want to go? Sure. I know your name's not really Eric, but for public reasons, I'll call you that. If you want to go ahead and try to answer that as well, and then I'll do a follow-up.
I actually asked a question like this during Mammothon to a few people. So, right. So, okay. So here's the way that runs down for me is I believe Manitowoc, prior to, October 31st, even prior to November 5th, I think they were obviously very keen to find something they could use against Stephen Avery. Now, whether or not they were part of it is somewhat sketchy, but I'll tell you what, Kevin Ramlow and his account of telling Colburn that he saw Teresa's RAV4, that's something that really suggests to me that it may be full on, at least when it comes to Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, it's all full on conspiracy, whatever, they were all in. They wanted Stephen out, and so those guys were all in. When it comes over to Calumet and stuff like that, that's more of a, I don't think they were necessarily gung-ho to get Stephen so much, but once all the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department evidence that they had planted was turning up, they were just inclined and I've used this term before, all compasses point north. If you think of law enforcement officers and law enforcement officials as compasses, all compasses point north. So they pretty much back each other up. They don't ask a lot of questions. They just back each other up. I call it the brotherhood of the badge, whatever. And I get why that happens. I understand that in the job that they do, police officers need to have that kind of camaraderie and brethren, and brotherhood to help, to watch each other's backs in dangerous situations. Get it. I totally get it. But in this situation, I think it was foul because it worked in the opposite, direction of justice. And so what I think is Calumet and most of the DOJ, I think, were just all compasses point north. They just jumped on board when they saw a few pieces of evidence come up against Stephen, and they just jumped on board and didn't bother asking any questions, and the train was already going a certain way at that point. I really think it all stems from Manitowoc County. I think the people that are in the know are in the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. I believe that Wiegert and Fassbender are also both. I believe they had some knowledge of what was happening. And the reason why I say that is because they so willfully did what they did to Brendan. It's so very telling, when you see those two idiots and what they're doing to Brendan. And to this day, they will not own their mistake. They will not own it. They won't even acknowledge it. And it's just bizarre. And so that to me tells me they're covering something bigger, and they knew. And that's kind of the way I feel about that. So the way that answer goes is I think a handful of people were definitely willfully doing it, and a larger group of people were just all compasses point north, going along, following along without asking many questions at all. So that's kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think you're as usual, you're pretty close to the mark. I mean, I would just say that the fact that we've got this Rubber Ducky going through all this case of evidence, 10 pages at a time. It shows that at least they were trying to do, or some of the people there in CASO were trying to do a professional job of it. And I can't help wondering, what did some of the Calumet sheriffs actually think of the fact that they've got these Manitowoc guys with this conflict of interest coming in? Yeah. Right. And making them look like idiots. They searched this bedroom 6 times, right. And on the 7th, when you get the crackerjack detective from Manitowoc turn up, you got
Colbert in there doing twist and shout. Anyway, no.
Yeah.
I agree. I do agree. What has always ring true to me is that when you get an MO of whether it be a criminal or somebody with a badge, they tend to repeat themselves, their patterns. So when you look back to the 1985 case, it is no big secret that they were the Manitowoc County, especially the sheriff as well as the DA, Dennis Vogel. Dennis Vogel in 1983 had actually prosecuted Gregory Allen, knew exactly what he looked like, knew exactly that he had a sexual appetite that was not considered to be safe. And they knew that Gregory Allen that day had not been being watched. They knew that he haunted that specific beach because he had already chased down a woman and exposed himself and tried to capture her and was making calls to her home phone. And the charges on that were reduced to indecent exposure. So Dennis Vogel very much was in the know. And
Dennis Vogel lied, saying
Absolutely.
that he was in Sturgeon Bay that day. Lied.
Right. Totally lied. And then you also have the situation that's always rang true to me is that piece of paper that had Allen's name was stuffed inside the folder of Stephen Avery. So it could have, within the first year in 1985, it could have been that this entire thing was reversed. Stephen was exonerated and Gregory Allen would have been prosecuted. But Manitowoc County, Manitowoc County, their officials, the ones in charge, the sheriff, the DA and such, were purposely and I say that absolutely without a shadow of a doubt to be true, were purposely, nefariously hiding that fact because of the whole Sandra Morris event. And in that, we have the same individuals in this case again. Now, Janet Reno was our attorney general for a while, and then she retired. But what's interesting to me is the newspapers put out an article. They interviewed Janet Reno for the United States Attorney General as she was retired. And she reported that she had to actually come out of retirement and she had to testify in the Stephen Avery case regarding the 1985 incident. So this goes all the way up to the United States big federal level when she's being involved. And she comes right out in the newspaper interview and she states that the reform of the Avery bill is to eliminate this mindset of locking in, no matter how the investigators felt about any individual, that they were forbidden to lock into one suspect and tunnel vision. The second very important note that Janet Reno makes, and she's addressing Peg L at the time, who is the Wisconsin Attorney General,
Yep.
Peg Lockenslager. I can't say her name, so
Lottenslager. There you go.
something. And the newspaper even has the two of them sitting in the court together, 2 rows apart, and they're the only 2 people visible in the picture, so you can see that they're obviously together. And I thought it was interesting that Reno points out very specifically that Wisconsin needs to be very cautious when it comes to individuals that are considered minors and those individuals that have how did they put it? I want to say I can't remember exactly, but they were deficient mentally. They had something that held them back from, and that's what we see in this next case as the Teresa Halbach case comes into view. We see Brendan, who obviously is having IEP meetings at school, which is individual education programs. And the reason you get IEP is because your state is funding. Currently, it's around, I believe it's $10,000 per semester that a school gets for any child enrolled in the IEP so that they get personal development skills. They are not mainstreamed when they're on the IEP. They are held in special classrooms because they have some sort of limited understanding, whether it be academic or social or both. And so it was, when Eric, when you were talking about fast, whatever, and Wiegert, I accidentally screwed up his name. No big harm there. If you look at them, the big question I've heard a lot is, would they have known that Brendan had this deficiency? Yes. They absolutely would have.
You only have to spend 5 minutes with him.
Well, and it's not only that. Prior to even meeting Brendan, they meet with the person that handles, and that's the school psychologist and the guidance counsel. They're the head of the IEP team. They head up your IEP team. When you go into the school and you have a child that's on the IEP, in that program, they're there to tell you how your child is socially behaving in school, how they're handling different situations. They have to make provisions for these children. A lot of these children are very quiet or they're very off the wall. You don't, and these programs are designed very specifically for that individual. So Fassbender, as well as Wiegert, would have been 100% in the know that they were working with a child that had difficulties. They were working with a child that was very susceptible, very gullible, and had no understanding of what it meant to repeat something coming out of, quote unquote, their own mouth. He would have never understood that. You could have said, did you murder JFK? I saw a little tweet about this one day. And Brendan would have thought to himself, you're touching my skin. You're touching my knee. Yeah, I murdered him if that'll get me out of this room. The Reed's technique was never to be used on Brendan. That's what Janet Reno goes and establishes, is that was no longer to be used on minors, that minors were to have taped confessions or taped interviews. And she was trying to get it set up. And it's almost like Peg L said, let me take this as a to-do list rather than a to-do not. And that's what's frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, Peg L has never commented on the Avery Dassey cases. She never did before she died. Not once. which I have always found interesting.
Yes, because she did intervene in another case, didn't she? Of some Hum Yong.
Yeah, I think there was something. Yeah, there was. I think. Yeah.
Shot dead six hunters or somebody that
Yeah, the
verbally
gentleman
abused them.
was Hmong. He went hunting, and
Yeah.
he wasn't on his own land. 6 hunters were found dead, and she did get involved in that case. And it's quite interesting because that case runs very parallel to the Halbach case as well. And there's some sort of a connection there that we can't a whole new show for that.
Yeah. I was going to ask as well. Well, I was going to touch on this fact, and of course, for a lot of us that are following the case, we started following it as a result of watching Making a Murderer. But Rubber Ducky, I've heard you mention on more than one occasion that you actually were following this case when it first happened. You actually remember hearing the Ken Kratz press conference as it happened. I wonder if you could expand a bit more on your sort of like your background history of knowing about the case, looking at it, and thoughts at the time.
Yeah. I lived very close to the prison, or I did at that time. I lived very close to the Stanley prison. So first of all, before Stanley prison was allowed to be there, it became a big political event for our community. Because, the first thing when somebody says, we're going to build a prison right in your backyard, everybody in the community goes, so that means rapists and murderers that escape basically have us first, right?
Yep.
So that was a big deal before Stephen Avery was ever considered. And we did vote, and we voted no. Lots of us voted no, but it still got put there. And so, unfortunately, right away, it had only been made a couple of years, I think, when Stephen Avery got transferred there. So it was very fresh in our minds when all of a sudden they were releasing what was put on the news as a convicted attempted murderer, attempted rape. And we were like, you're letting who out and for why?
Yeah.
So that got to be a big deal for us. So we learned about Stephen Avery, and immediately when the news coverage came out that it was another person, DNA had proved it, we all dropped it like a hot potato. Oh, okay, and forgot about it. Well, lo and behold, I started noticing in the next few years, it wasn't even a few years, it was within a year, I started noticing that there was a gentleman that was receiving $25,000 from the state of Wisconsin, and it was Steve Avery. And I thought, that's all you get? Are you serious? But then the number jumped up to $450,000. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay, that seems more in line. I even thought to myself, heck, a couple million, 18 years away from your family while your family grew up, whatever. So I was just kind of nodding as the papers would go by. And the reason I knew this is one of my good friends owns a newspaper company, and he would run, long story short, his staff got cut short, and he needed people to volunteer in the community to come in and proofread for him on Wednesday nights before he released the paper. So I just would jump in and I would proofread, and I'd see these articles of the money going up and up and up. Well, at one point, I kind of forgot about it for quite a while. And then somebody came to me and they were like, you watched that Steve Avery thing, and he was getting quite a bit of money. He's getting 18 million now is what they're going for. And I dropped my jaw. I'm like, what? Where? And they showed me, and I was like, oh no. And they're like, what? I said, you don't want to come at it for millions like that. I'm worried for him. And they're like, what do you think will happen? I'm like, he'll disappear or something. That just, that just doesn't seem good, Yeah. Then the next thing I know, it was like overnight, it went to 36 million. And I'm like, oh, Lord have mercy. He's not going to make it to see the day he gets the money. I just didn't feel he would make it. It was just astonishing. And the closer he got to 18 million, the closer I watched, or 36 million, the closer I watched, because I was like, is he really going to get that kind of money? Well,
he was probably never going to get that much, but
no, I figure he would get about 4.5 million in the long run.
Something like that, most likely.
Yeah. That's what I kind of guessed out of the whole deal. Right. But what really shocked me was when all of a sudden the news came on, And they're saying that we have a 25-year-old freelance photographer that has gone missing after photographing a van on the Avery property. He's the last one to see it. And I told everybody, bingo, told you,
Yeah.
did the whole told you. Then months went by. Brendan Dassey comes along. The news people, including the interviews with the Sheriff Pogo and them, all started stating this story about how this individual, all we knew at that point was a 16-year-old nephew had confessed to helping Stephen Avery commit this entire crime. And it broke my heart.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I hope he rots in prison the rest of his life. I would have honestly, I walked away, turned my back, spit in the dirt, and said, enough of that. How dare he? He had me totally supporting him. I've told all my friends that, he's in, he was innocent before. That girl going missing, that had nothing to do with him. They're just doing that to get 36 million, not have to pay it. But when Brendan came out, I changed my tune. And not only did I change my tune, but Wisconsin changed our tune. And I noticed in conversations with people locally, they were saying things, they'd go drinking in the bar and I was a bartender. I don't drink alcohol, but I was a bartender at the time, part-time on Friday nights only. And I would notice the crowd when they talked about it, they would say things like, well, if he survives, if the jury finds him not guilty, he walks out of there. Steve Avery won't live to tell the tale because we're not going to have some rapist out here that's going to kill our kids. So it was everybody was up in arms. And then Ma'am came out and I sat there and went, oh my God, are you serious?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did hear the King Kratz thing right at the dinner table. He said he came on the 6 o'clock news. I believe it was Cindy Schott was our news lady, and I just adored her at the time. I think it was her. Anyway, she said a news broadcast was interrupting their program, and they wanted to bring it to us. And they said, Kratz got on there, and he said, turn your kids away from the TV.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was sitting in the other room with my kids eating dinner, and I remember we had peas that night because I choked on them. I had never in my life heard such vulgarity on our evening news and such explicit details of anything ever, not from overseas. I mean, they were taking Americans hostage in other countries, beheading them and stuff, and we were not shown anything like that to spare us. Yet King Kratz apparently had the license to burst that bubble, and we were just sitting there at the dinner table, floored with what my eating. I think my kids were like, they were young. They were still in grade school. We're sitting listening to, and I didn't even know what to say. The pool, King Kratz, oh, yes, we absolutely know that she has to be dead because of the pools of blood, quote unquote, pools of blood. Somebody from the press said something along the lines of, well, where are the pools of blood? And Kratz says, what? And they said, where are the pools of blood? And he said, quote unquote, and I'll never forget this, under the seat in this vehicle of hers in the RAV. Talk about a lie. Now, I don't care how new you are to this case. Where are the pools of blood?
Yeah. There's no pools of blood. Yeah. That's another Kratz lie.
There's a question from Fen, which is so if Making a Murder had never have come out, we would never have known about really what
the truth of it.
What we do know now. And
I would still be thinking Steve Avery was guilty and that Brendan Dassey was guilty and that Brendan had told on him. That's where I personally would have been and where I would have stayed. The girls on Netflix have they have really done their deed in making sure that corruption is called out. And, we hear people in the Guilter section say, well, you base everything off Ma'am and all the documentary. And if you read anything else, you'll find out that that's a load of crap. Well, let me tell you something. Me and Rich and I'm sorry, Eric and Paul Capaldi we have read a lot. And so has millions of people. And those that have read still to this day now know more that they're not guilty at all, that they are absolutely wrongfully convicted.
Right. We've dug into the documents thinking we might find that the state had some ground to stand on, but upon closer inspection, no, they really don't.
Well, and
And then when you
been
look at things
nefarious.
continuing to come out, everything cuts against the state. As things continue, you never see anything coming out that cuts against Stephen. Oh, sorry. Maybe Lynn Hartman.
I
But
refuse
even
to
that
say
is
her
ridiculous.
name. Don't give her no air. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, they're just trying to discredit him because that's all they've got left to cling on to. You know, they're desperate. What I was also going to
they're desperate to cling to that and procedural bars.
Right.
Don't forget. They don't want to argue the merits. They want to stay the hell away from the merits. They don't want anyone near that.
I was reading yesterday, 974.07. Now, Zellner talks a lot about 06, so it's 974.06 statute there, but there's a 974.07 that I want to bring up to Zellner. So I'm going to be writing her an email this week. You know, you guys dig into that a little bit, see if that applies to Brendan some. It's not something I want to go into grave detail here, but I just wanted to, as long as I had everybody's attention, if you're into the legal stuff, whether you're Travis or you're Tracy or whoever, just graze over 9704.07 because it does talk about at any given time being able to do this. And that's a big deal. And it does appear that there may be something to that would give Brendan a leg up in the courts again, which we desperately need a jumping stone there.
Yes, absolutely. The miracle seemed to happen and it didn't, and then SCOTUS dropped the ball. But yeah, I'll have to look into that. What I was going to ask, and because we were touching on this earlier when we did a little test run, was not only were the general public very much anti Stephen Avery, particularly when they found out that he was the suspect in the disappearance of Teresa Halbach. But am I right in thinking that Stephen Avery maybe didn't endear himself even to within his own family by the fact that he was basically bragging about the fact that he's going to be super rich, and you know, for somebody that hasn't had much money, the fact that he was suddenly going to be very, very rich would have led to one or two tensions within the family.
Suppose that's a possibility.
Well, I do think that the construct of the family does kind of have to be called in because they've put themselves on the media face, and they've all made comments and they've all said stuff. And when you look at the last read, or it might be just coming up because I have to read a little ahead to record it.
Sure.
Right away, Earl interrupts the investigators right away in the beginning. And we're talking about like the 10th of November even. And Earl actually interrupts them and says, hey, I was talking to my wife, Candy Avery, and I told her, I think Steve did it and he's guilty.
Right.
So automatically you have his own closest family members jumping on board to say he's guilty. You know, we have, if you even go little reverse engineer this, think about this. Stephen was in prison for those 18 years. That's a horribly long time, but it's the time frame that he was in prison that created the biggest problem, because that's where you grew up. Is when you turn 18 until you hit about 40, you're still growing up in a sense. You're still getting used to socialism. You're still getting used to relationships, learning how to bond with people, who you can trust and who you can't, and so forth. He missed out on that.
Yes.
So it put him at a huge deficit. He goes into the newspaper. He is quoted as saying that Chuck said, well, if you can make it in there, you can make it out here. And Stephen actually was quoted as saying that hurt a lot when Chuck said that. And then he moved into an eye shanty.
Mm-hmm.
Out of the houses. He moved to his own little place to where I think he felt a little safer because he didn't know what to think of it all. It probably, was a huge shock to his system to have even female contact with people. Remember, you're not going to even have a handshake in jail. You're not going to touch people. You're not going to talk to people on a social level that you do out in society. So he was socially deprived. And in that, He gets out. Now he's been gone 18 years. The family has been struggling because I'm sure that hurt the Avery business, being that Stephen Avery at that time had been wrongfully convicted of an assault, which involved attempted murder and alleged attempted rape.
Mhm.
So that probably hurt the business. They probably had some resentment towards Stephen during that time. And now they've worked hard to maintain the business. Now he's getting out of prison. He's talking about he's going to get some money. He's going in the newspaper saying Chucky's not happy with the way things are going. And Stephen also was quoted in the paper as stating that there were hard feelings on and disagreements on how that business should be run. So I don't think things were going real smooth amongst the family members then. Now you factor in, you've got Manitowoc County coming in for an investigation, a missing girl. Stephen's only been out for less than 2 years at the time. I'm sure they didn't even know what to think. And that's why you see Earl, he's constantly throwing Stephen under the bus. Every chance he gets with law enforcement for the first year, he is constantly saying, yep, I think he's guilty. Yet he's the one that's got the gun, that's hunting with a friend who has stated for the record that he made sure that Chucky and Stephen did not know he was leaving work early to go do this hunting right at the time that Teresa goes missing. And as well as it puts him in a suspicious position because he supposedly was on this golf cart driving right past where the RAV would have been seen and claims he never saw it. Now, if this case had been done properly and the suspects would have been investigated, that would be one thing. But my big question that I ask all of you, and I want to know this because I think I have the answer, but why on earth or how on earth did the law enforcement know that their tunnel vision on Stephen as the suspect was going to work in court if the defense could have pulled up 80 different suspects and trailed them right across the jury, which we need one person to have reasonable doubt, and all of a sudden we have either a mistrial or not guilty? So there had to have been at some point these investigators, when they were only targeting Stephen, not asking Ryan Hilligus for where he was or treating him as a suspect, not asking Scott Blodorn, not asking Chuck or Earl or Bobby or Scott Tadich, any of these suspects that Stephen named in his Denny thing there where he was trying to call out all these individuals.
Yep.
How did they know that they weren't going to lose the case automatically because they hadn't investigated the suspects, unless they knew they had the Denny Law in their pocket before there was ever a trial? That's the problem.
Well, that's certainly a part of it. It was basically, we may not have the strongest case, but, we're going to do our best with it. We're going to take what we have, we're going to argue it this way, and we're going to hope for the best. And it worked out. I mean, it worked for them. It worked
out because they had the
honestly
Denny Law. Not
sure how that happened, really, but it did. It worked. They're in Wisconsin. Maybe all that press, that, there was somebody in the chat here talking about it. That press back then, every night you're hearing Stephen's guilty, Stephen's guilty, Stephen's guilty on the media, right?
Yeah, the mantra.
So it's like there is no fair in this. There's no fairness in it. You know what I mean? It's like, if they're constantly telling everybody that Stephen's guilty, Stephen's guilty, Stephen's guilty, this is being told to the hall box, being told to everybody on the news every night, is being told. There is no, I mean, who's there telling everybody about all the crap we know now? Okay, if you had all these people that were so flipping convinced that Stephen was guilty that they needed to be saying it every flipping night on the news, then it's like, why are we now finding out all this crap that we now know that this investigation was a complete farce? And so how were people so sure on this stuff?
It bothers me also that when they went to Stephen, Buting and Strain went to Stephen and explained what the Denny Law was, that it would narrow it down. And he already knew because he had the Denny Law the first time. Mm-hmm. So when they explained that to Stephen, they forgot to explain to Stephen a very vital point. And that is 3 criteria had to be met to be able to claim another suspect, okay? And one of that
Yes.
criteria was motive. And Stephen
Yeah.
said, but I don't have a motive. So
They
no,
didn't. Yeah,
don't give him a motive.
they
But
didn't
what
offer him one for him. Yeah.
right. But a serious lawyer that was very concerned about their client would have immediately said, I understand where you're coming from, son, but listen to me. It's a requirement by law. And if you do not give me a motive, or we do not let our investigator find a motive, and you just go in there and say no motive, you're going to have the Denny Law on your lap. But that never got said to Stephen. He was never aware that if he didn't supply a motive, that he was going to be in this situation.
Mhm.
So that's ineffectual counseling to the maximum. If you don't know that, it's kind of like one time when I was a young kid, I transferred my license plate to a different vehicle. I sent my paperwork in. I did all the work, everything legal, and I immediately switched the plates on and waited for the tag to, the little sticker to come later. I got pulled over and I got told to come, you're going to pay a fine. Nope, I went to court because I didn't know that rule. And so I sat there and I told the judge everything I had to say. And that judge looked at me and he said something. Ignorance is no bliss in the eyes of the law.
Yep.
Right.
And I said, you mean even me not knowing the law,
Right.
you're still going to find me? And he said, absolutely. That's how law works. So if the judge in this little tiny county that I'm in is giving me that speech, why is that speech not being given to Stephen before, so that he allowed, because they did have motives on certain people, but Stephen was being kind of bullheaded about it because he didn't have a motive to do it. So he was trying to make a point. Why should I supply a motive for anybody else? I don't have a motive to kill this poor woman. So, I've always held at that I felt like that's where the biggest drop of the ball went. If the Denny Law had been dissolved, we wouldn't even have the same court case.
Yeah, but they're never going to do that. Every state has a version of Denny. I don't see Denny going away. What does piss me off, and what I do think needs to be changed, is if the prosecution comes after you and they don't offer a motive, that if they're basically determining that it's a crime without motive because they're trying you for it, right? And suggesting that you don't have motive, then I believe that should translate into the Denny Law, and therefore the defense shouldn't have to offer motive for any of their suspects, because we are clearly seeing the prosecution is identifying this as a potential motiveless crime. So to me, the big change in Denny needs to happen is if the prosecution doesn't offer motive, then the defense doesn't have to either. That is even ground. That is a fair playing field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
I've got a just to prove that I do actually look at the chat. A message from Fen to say that Ashley Holt is asking, do you think it would have worked out in their favour without Brendan's false confession?
Oh, that's an interesting.
I'd say no.
I don't think so either.
I think honestly,
I'm on the fence about it.
You look at the crime itself, supposedly from Ken Kratt's state prosecutor's view, everything of the actual brutal rape and everything took place in Stephen Avery's bedroom. And believe it or not, they pulled the paneling and the carpet out of Stephen's room, and they still did not find the DNA of Teresa Halbach, the victim. So I believe that would have backfired on the state very much so in sticking with that scenario. However, we also know that the jury was not sequestered, so they were allowed to go home and, of course, view whatever they were going to view, just told not to. Yeah. And also, we have Remaker letting his partner's husband go in on the jury between 9 and somewhere like, I don't know, maybe 1 o'clock. It was hours behind closed doors when the jury is in there sequestered trying to work out their own decisions. And so reprimanded, Remaker got reprimanded for it. So obviously we know that was wrong. Why it wasn't a mistrial at that point, I'll never understand, because in my book, that's jury tampering. But when you look at the case itself, where were they going to get the DNA to back this up? They basically, even though they didn't use Brendan's case per se against Stephen in his trial, the jury was going home and they were listening to the news. And it was all about how Brendan had said this, Brendan had said this, Brendan had said that. And it's quite obvious we have the case where you get into Brendan's trial and they don't use any evidence, not a drop. There wasn't any evidence. So all they could use was words.
Mhm.
And they used it, whether they said his name in court or not. He was used as leverage to manipulate the jury's mindset that it wasn't just one individual saying, nope, I didn't do it. It was one individual saying, nope, I didn't do it. But then we had a young child that has learning disabilities, apparently not knowing any better, according to the prosecution, and telling the whole scenario. When you look at the actual interviews of Brendan, and do something, if you ever have a question on Brendan, white out everything that's ever said in Brendan's interviews but his statements.
Mhm.
You have very little to read.
Yep, absolutely.
There's hardly anything to read. It is absolutely him trying to get out of that room. He suffered, and I believe he still does, from a social anxiety. You can see it in his body language. He's in defensive mode where he's got his head down most of the time. He's got his legs crossed most of the time. His body language is very closed off.
Yep.
And I believe he was in defense the whole time. He didn't have one adult. Why didn't Blaine crack? Because he was never left alone with the investigators.
Yep.
Blaine got off the bus with Brendan. If Brendan saw Teresa, so did Blaine. But yet Blaine held his own, never said he saw her. And yet Brendan caved. Why? Brendan was functioning under a mental deficiency, plus not one adult on his side. Not one, not even mama.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. I've got a kind of question to both of you as well, and that is that DAs don't lose, do they? Some of them have either a near 100% record, or they have a 100% record, and that's why we get so many people confess to something they haven't actually done, because it's either presented to them as, well, you're either going to do life, and that means life if you say you're innocent, or you can do a deal whereby you'll get maybe 20 years and you'll be free then. But am I right in saying that more or less in America, most DAs have this near perfect record of wins?
I'm not sure about that.
I can't comment on that.
Well, I'm sure I've heard of cases. I don't know if it was the Peterson one that was the reason why Kevin Peterson, Mike Peterson didn't want to go and do a retrial because he knew that the odds against him,
clearly Durham County had it
was still going to be hard to overcome.
Yeah.
So
certainly there clearly was a prejudice in Durham County with Michael Peterson. So I understand how he feels. I mean, it was clearly there. So.
Yeah.
Well, and Stephen Avery is not the only case that Manitowoc County has had issues with.
Right.
You can look back into history. There's also a newer case. It's actually an older case that has surfaced lately. A 2-year-old was in foster care, and you have the same coroner. Well, actually, he's an ME or something, medical examiner. You have the same coroner who establishes that the child died while playing, and then later a family member is made aware that this child was abused to the point that it killed him. And we look at the same players there. And then we look at the Ricky Hotchletter case.
Yep.
We have the same players there. Unfortunately, when you start digging into these cases, many people don't know how to connect the dots, even though it's the same individual with the same MO. Always pointing the finger at, it's a needle in a haystack is a great quote from Remacher. Anytime that Remacher says it's a needle in a haystack, I get suspicious generally, just because he's a drug, narcotics investigator.
Yeah.
So when you talk about needles, that's suspicious because, what do people do with drugs a lot of time? They use needles. So when you get overdose deaths and he's saying, oh, it's just like a needle in a haystack, that's just downright, to me, some sort of uncouth, it just says a lot about the individuals and how their mentality is. They don't want to investigate the truth. They've come right out. A lot of these investigators, as they've retired, come out and tell you why they'll take a confession over investigation. Because why would you want to spend hundreds of man hours and hundreds of work hours to develop a case when you can just take somebody's word right off the books and go with it?
Yeah.
It's money.
Well, it's a good thing that it's actually starting to come out that witness accounts are really not as reliable as previously thought, because hopefully that will begin to change. Because witness
definitely.
accounts are often flawed.
Well,
Highly flawed.
think of this account. I told you a little earlier, I spoke about how I'm kind of reading, well, the RD's researchers are kind of reading through some of the pre-trial.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting that in the pre-trial, Pam Sturm states that she used sleeve of her clothing to test the RAV doors to see if they're locked.
Yeah,
and she claimed it was a two-door car. They
Uh,
even say, "Are you sure?" And she said, "I think so." Then they ask her, "Did you use a tissue?" And she says, "No." Then we go to the actual trial. What does Pam say she used? A tissue. Obviously, these witnesses are not being honest about their approach because they're either lying in the pre-trial or they're lying on the trial. Either way, they're a liar.
Mm-hmm.
How can you possibly be mistaken about a two-door versus a four-door? I just, no, it's nefarious.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's as Stacy. It was Stacy that actually was speaking to us, wasn't he, in Australia? And he was saying that what will happen is that all these people involved with the case, they'll all get together and they won't actually tell somebody, we want you to lie. It'll be a case of, now you're going to do the right thing, aren't you? We need to get this mother. We need to get him. You know, you're going to get on that stand and you're going to do the right thing, aren't you? Right. And there won't even be any mention of you've got to get up and lie. Right. Yeah, but it's made perfectly clear by a load of eyes looking at you.
Yes,
you're gonna do the right thing.
We conform to the peer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nudge, nudge. Say no more. Say no more. You're gonna do the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
That sounds like part of a Monty Python sketch, doesn't it?
It is. I love Monty Python. Actually, it's my sense of humor completely. Run away.
Life of Brian.
I was telling somebody about your favorite part, Paul. The guy graffitiing the Latin.
Romans go home.
Yeah, Romans go home. Yeah.
Well, what I particularly liked about it was the fact that when I watched that movie, I was actually staying in Melrose I was renting a room, and the landlady's boyfriend at the time was a professor of Latin and was a professor of Latin down at Manchester University. And he bought this video along back in the days of videos, believe it or not. That's what we watched it. Yes. And he watched that scene. And he said that they had got it absolutely spot on. Everything in that scene about Romans go home was correct.
Yeah,
but no,
all the Latin grammar was correct.
Yeah, but no, my everybody's favorite scene is Biggest Dickus. That is without doubt the best bit. I just love that one.
Monty Python. I was just watching the Holy Grail the other day. The part with when Galahad he sees the monastery or whatever, it's all the women are there and everything, and that one girl's like, "Oh, that naughty Groot" or whatever. It was so funny. I was laughing myself. Oh my god, those movies, man. Anyway, we're off topic.
Yes, we are completely off topic. Now,
we all love Monty Python. We'll have to have a Monty Python like sideshow or something.
There we go.
Well, actually, there was one time up at St. John's Church when three of us were asked to do a 2-minute talk on our favourite subject, and I was given I was charged with talking about music, which I talked about for 2 minutes. Another guy was was very keen on photography, so he talked about photography. And this third guy, Duncan, his passion is Monty Python, and he brought in a dead parrot. Well, a wooden parrot that he keeps in the doorway, because of course there's that famous the dead parrot sketch. And I said to them, I said, why didn't you choose Life of Brian, Biggest Dickus? That would have gone down really well in the church. And he just he just said no.
Yeah.
I've always
I'm not going to church saying that.
The Monty Python part where they've got the girl up there, the lady, and they're accusing her of being a witch always reminded me of kind of like the Stephen Avery thing, because there's absolutely no proof this woman is a witch. And the guy in the back, who's fully human, obviously, is like, she turned me into a newt.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, yes. You know, it's kind of like, oh, okay, we're back with Stephen Avery again. Yep.
Right.
So much of this case fits into that kind of category. It's unbelievable. And some of the Casio reading that's really got me stumped is we have 2 pages away from each other. We have on the 7th, this happened, and it's where they are talking about, I believe it's the Rav and so forth and everything. And then the very next, the partner that was with him 2 pages later is doing his own report. And he does it the next day. So one of them is telling the whole scenario and reporting that it happened on the 7th. And it's a major event. So, and it's in the daily read, you catch it.
Yeah.
But then, you know, the partner that's with him, that's supposed to be the other eyewitness as an investigator, he says it all happened a different day. We have, I know what it was. They're transporting the barrels and the barrels and a whole bunch of evidence, including the blood in the quarry rock, a tissue with blood on it, or paper towel, I should say, all kinds of stuff. The one guy, he says, on the 7th, he was made to get ready and transport and sign off to the State Crime Lab of Wisconsin, all this information and all this evidence. And then the 2 statements later, you have a guy who's saying, no, I've got this wrong. Let me back up. So on the 7th, this gentleman is picking up this evidence from the State Crime Lab. On the 7th, he does his full report about, you know, meeting the State Crime Lab individual, signing off for all the evidence, having it enter it back into the Calumet County evidence lockers, blah, 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 blah. It's coming back from the State Crime Lab on the 7th. 2 pages away, we have, I believe it's Tyson, on the 8th is readying the same materials to go to the State Crime Lab. How did he get it back from the crime lab on the 7th, yet it was being sent on the 8th? It just makes no sense. And we find a lot of that as we're reading the Caso, and you have to pause and you have to say, okay, first of all, the whole point in these investigators doing their own reports is supposed to be a double check.
Right.
It's supposed to be our backup. So if the math is wrong, that's supposed to be questioned, but it never even is double checked. They locked up that report and they put it aside till after many, many years, ma'am comes out, and then we get it years later. And now as we break it down and we go through it, we can see this investigation. You can start calling out and going, okay, why do we have a report on this page where Rick Reimers shows up for duty, writes a full report that he was assigned absolutely no duties for the day? I was assigned absolutely no duties for the day. You want to make a bet that I don't believe that? He had duties that he didn't want to put on paper, maybe, but to state that he had no duties for the day. And then you find him on another report where another investigator is reporting that he and this other investigator are doing this on that day. He totally skips it. Oh, I just get so frustrated by them because they're not doing their job right in this investigation. And whether or not Calumet believed or didn't believe that they had the right individual, they certainly do not do their job proper whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. Hey, you know, whenever you see stuff like that in the documents, you know, Rubber Ducky, it's all just typos, remember. You know,
I know.
you don't find that very satisfying. Neither do
If I hear, I've quit. I now, this case has developed kind of allergic reaction to the word coincidence for me. I kind of shudder when somebody says it, and I just look at them, and every time it says one more time, I start saying it a little more mean. I'm like, suspicious. It's called suspicious. I just can't stomach that anymore. And the word typo, first of all, how do you get a typo when Callahan is, like you pointed out, I about dropped my jaw, Eric, when you did that with I think his name is Razor.
Razor,
And you
yeah.
brought out, yes, my jaw was on the floor. The fact that Culhane is doing this on hand signature. Okay, there's your typo. She hand signed it. Hand signed it 10 days prior to her having an accident with the bullet.
Right.
10 days prior, she knowingly, just psychically knew to fill out her little form that says, I'm going to have an accident and this is how I'm going to handle it.
I'm going to need a deviation in 2 weeks.
Yeah, Eric, how about you just walk into your insurance company and hand them $200? And when they ask you why, say, hey, Eric, you're already paid up for them for 6 months. Why are you giving us more money? Just tell them, I'm going to have an accident in 10 days.
Yeah, right. Her Razor likened it to a speeding ticket. He's like, just imagine you went down to the courthouse today and said, here's my $200. And they're like, what the hell? I'm going to get a speeding ticket in 2 weeks. Don't worry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you have to look at this too. Back in the day, old school, and Eric, you've been in this case for a very, very long time.
Yep.
And back in the day, we were really focused on the county. But now look at what we've got. We've got the state giving away bones, breaking the law there, hiding the identity of the bones. Mm-hmm. What do we have back in the case itself? The state doing the same thing through Crime Lab. So when Ertl shows up, State Crime Lab himself, investigator for the Crime Lab, shows up at the little pit, and it's time to get the bones. He himself is the one that says, just put them all in a box. We'll sort them out at the Crime Lab. That also is very suspicious. Why you would not grid the area off just like any other crime. Go through it and meticulously discover and photograph where each bone is originally laying. How is it laying compared to this bone? Connect the whole puzzle. He doesn't even do that then.
Yeah. I've often thought that Ertl was pissed. Personally, I think he walked up with his team and saw what the pig's ear that they'd made of that burn pit and how they had started digging in with picks and shovels already and everything. I think he got offended. I think his pride might have been a little bit got a little bit of a ding to it, because I kind of interpret that bit about throw the bones into a box and we'll sort it out later. I see that as possibly being a passive aggressive, like, yeah, you guys already fucked this up, so just put them in a box and we'll deal with this later. I can almost see it being that kind of
more. There's still more to him, because Eisenberg doesn't get the bones first.
Is because he obviously didn't seem to have very much love for Fassbender. No. In the way that they were exchanging emails, he kind of was like, when Fassbender asked him, why weren't any pictures taken, and Ertl's just like, we don't take pictures of crime scenes that are obviously disturbed. It's like, yeah, I think Ertl's got a little bit of a he's still a little bit hurt,
tenacious and pissed. Yeah, but we have the bones going not to Eisenberg first. They actually get taken to a very, very good anthropologist who looks at the bones. He grabs the ilium bone and he says, this bone is from a female human. That's all he could say. Mm-hmm. Just a human female. And at that point, every single one of the investigators present with those bones, including the State Crime Lab, had just heard a very important anthropologist that has done factual papers and helped many cases, just told them that pelvic bone that was found in the quarry was a female human. Yet they take him to Eisenberg. She lays him on her desk, says she was on vacation all weekend, which apparently lasts till Thursday in her world. Mm-hmm. So Thursday, on the 10th of November, she decides, I can look at these bones. And she can't tell if they're human or animal. Mm-hmm. She's just at I don't know. But yet later when she breaks it down, you bet your bottom dollar, they're sorting out the bones using her report on the ones they're going to give the family to turn around and then later claim, well, we might have given them animal bones. Please, if you're doing this, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's not just a little funny that particular bone you just brought up gets deemed to be possible human.
Possible.
By Eisenberg.
They worked,
right?
Yeah, the defense worked on Eisenberg every which way, and the most she would give is possible human bone. Possible.
Right. Well,
when we knew it was human.
That's the way she determined it in her reports. And that's, I mean, if we realize, because she obviously said all those little fragments that KZ wants to test, she said all those were human. The funny thing is, and the reason why I bring this up is because the state was arguing about this hip bone in their response. They stuck to that hip bone. They only wanted to talk about that hip bone. And why is that? Oh, yeah, because it was determined to be possible human. They didn't want to talk about the fragments that were deemed to be human. Right? So they didn't want to talk about those. And that's, so it's, as you were saying that, it's just very interesting, strikes me, oh, really? So the really credible forensic anthropologist said that was definitely a human female bone. Interesting. And then it goes to Eisenberg, and she deems it possible human. Very interesting.
This is where, you have to look at it and go, how long has the state actually played a hand in this? Because the state is the one that is handing off the bones to Dr. Bennett. The state is the one that's working with Eisenberg. And they've chosen which anthropologist? The one that has said possible human bone rather than the one that has identified it as human. And the reason is because they cannot use the Denny Law. They cannot enforce the Denny Law to that level where no third party could be pointed at if that bone is Teresa Hawbox down in that quarry. That's why Zellner wants that. Because then it opens up the playing field to any suspect, or I should say any individual that is around that area at that time that has any type of involvement or even the opportunity to touch. Yeah.
Well, minus motive here. The means or opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that could be a guest that came to the quarry for some reason. It could be one of the workers. It could be pretty much anybody that was in the area. And then they were not going to be able to just look at Stephen and say, you did it. You did it. We know that. So the pelvic bone is the key to this entire case, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's certainly factoring in big. I'll say that.
With the fact that the CD was kept in Fassbender's storage for 12 years.
Do we get to pick what kind of stuff? I think he had a little music box with the little ballerina that went ting, 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 and spun. And the drawer beneath it is what I imagine in my head, that he had the CD. And he was like, that little guy off of The Rings or whatever. He was like, my pretty. That's how I see Fassbender.
My precious.
Like he had, my precious. Yeah, that's how I see Fassbender. Every time I look at him, he's that little goblet or whatever.
I hope I see some memes on Twitter tomorrow with Fassbender saying "my precious." That would be awesome.
Yeah, I just see him holding that CD. My precious. Yeah. That's.
That's great. That's awesome.
Do you think that he might also have a photograph album of bones in a burn pit as they were dumped?
I think he's got probably like a lot of photographs, including H1s and H2s, that we're being told when all the different researchers, not just RD researchers, all kinds of researchers, are trying to get H1 and H2 photos, which there's 90 some of them. Yeah. And the only documentation that we can find is that it says body, measurement, dig site, and salvage yard.
Yep.
And I think he is honestly one of these individuals has basically got them at home.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, they did it with the CD. Why not some other pictures? But we're being told they're being held for trial.
Right.
It's funny. We were talking about Monty Python, and obviously it's comedy. I was explaining to a printer yesterday about the trip to Australia, what was it all about? What am I into? Because how we often hear people saying about the fact that we're tending to talk in our own little echo chamber. Well, here in the Scottish borders, it's a complete vacuum. I can assure you that there is hardly anybody knows about making a murder. I have maybe 2 or 3 pupils.
How do I have so many? How do I have so many subscribers from there then? There's
We
got to
need
be
to get
some.
busy, Eric.
No,
We
no,
need to
no,
get
no.
over there.
No, Scottish borders, dude. It's like where I am. You know, central belt of Scotland. Yeah, there's loads, but I'm in my own little vacuum here. So when
So
I'm
you're talking about some smaller part of Scotland.
well, it's a whole
You're
province.
segmenting up Scotland now.
It's a whole province. It's like 50 miles away is Berwick. There's Karen Astley. I haven't heard much from her lately, but I'm sure she's around on the scene. She's the nearest, and then you go down to like the over the border in Englandshire, and you have to go up to Edinburgh and Glasgow. But obviously, like, I understand that geography is not your strong point. But anyway, the Scottish borders is like a.
Where does Sharon Sunshine live?
Well, Glasgow.
Where does Scotch
sure.
Andy live?
Never
mind.
Certainly, they're not in the Scottish borders. Anyway, let's put it that way. But no, what I was going to say was, in explaining to this guy, this printer fella, and I'm explaining all the story, and you can't help but laugh at the whole scenario, and it's like one of the most incredible stories that you've ever come up with. But the best of it is, it's all true. This is what's really bugs me about this case. That's a question. Can Zone exhume the bones now? Oh my goodness!
Not without a court order.
It has to have a court order, but yeah, it could be done. The bones, she claims, are basically destroyed because they've been commingled. The only bone that would matter would be
right?
Yeah. The only bone that would matter that we can absolutely identify is that pelvic bone. And with the Andy system, we know in 90 minutes now, keep in mind, in 2002, September 10th, Culhane was court ordered that she had to release the information regarding the identification of the pubic hair that was found on the shirt. And it turned out to be Gregory Allen. Mm-hmm. And that was on the 10th of September, 2002. And I'm sorry, 2003, I believe. Sorry about that. And then the next day, Stephen's home, literally walking out them doors. We have 90 minutes on an Andy system, and it's all over with. Just let us have the pelvic bone.
Yep. Well, sorry, I've got somebody saying here that the Vanessa Overton, her expert, said that they would be too damaged to be of any value.
Well, the Andy system is much more sensitive, and it would most likely be a very, very, very high probability be able to test those bones. In the X-rays that they did, they were able to see that in the skull itself, they can see the radiopaquine shows that there's what they assume is lead inside there. So we are looking at most likely a gunshot with the beveling as well. So we know that set of bones was at a completely different location. And then we have another set of bones, actually 3 piles down in the quarry that are in question. And one of that was the pelvic bone. But my biggest concern was Michael's material quarry actually had a leg bone. It said a long bone. And it claimed the gentleman that recorded the investigator put in his report that it was flesh attached. Now, what's interesting is that goes into evidence without a tag on it. And we never hear from again, but bam, we get BZ. Just comes out of nowhere, and nobody knows where BZ is. So there leaves some questions there as to, is that possibly the bone that we're looking for? Is that one? That also right there would be that the only piece of evidence that they would have that they themselves had identified as Teresa Halbach, and a triangulation between the soda can, the pap smear, and that little tiny tissue on BZ, because no bones have ever been tested, just so y'all know that. The only amount that was tested was a minute amount of tissue on this bone. So,
and as far as the bones being too damaged, I think that's not really an issue, because Dr. Selden said he identified bones in the California wildfires that were pretty much to the same exact degree that he was seeing here in the Stephen Avery case. So I think there's a pretty good chance he would get a result if they hadn't been given back, they hadn't been basically destroyed. And and like I said, even if the Hallbachs agree to let them be exhumed or whatever, you still have an issue with contamination now, because they're not sitting in the evidence locker in the original bag they were collected in and all that sort of stuff. They've now been moved to different bags, moved around by humans over at Whiting Funeral Home, and taken over to the funeral, to the cemetery, and all these things have happened now, and those bones are no longer in the state that they were in when they were collected. And that's a problem.
And I wish we could say, yeah, they can be exhumed. With a Catholic family, most likely they would be buried. But unfortunately, there are other options. We are looking at possible recremation. Family could have decided to let her ashes go in Florida. We just don't know.
Yep.
But when you look at
they were buried, that, from what I understand, that's confirmed.
Is it? Okay, that I had not heard. I thank you for that clarification. But when you look at the other situation, if we're saying that, if we're going with the state story that Teresa and Stephen remained on his property and it was that personal that it would not have left his own yard, then why do we have parts of humans scattered all the way around this area? We've got the pelvic bone down on the quarry. We've got 2 other piles of bones down on the quarry. We've got a bone down over across another distance, which is on the opposite side of Avery, which would be 2 lots away from the Rodant quarry, as well as the I'm trying to think, the Manitowoc quarry. And we've got the Michaels material quarry, which that is the only time that we've ever read in this case that they found a bone and they quote unquote state flesh was attached. They have 3 of the 5 dogs all respond before and later on that area. So the dogs are only trained to react, according to Julie Kramer, to human blood or human remains.
Right.
So, it really, it bugs me when we're not looking at the bones that we already know are Teresa that weren't at Stevens. And I think that needs to be looked at as a backup plan, if you will. In fact, because the state, they're dragging their feet. Talk about languishing. Lord have mercy. We're on the 8th of May. Where the heck are you people? And why aren't you doing your job? Where's your paperwork? Why is the state grabbing the talking stick when it's not even their turn to talk, yet the people that are supposed to be talking, somebody said on Twitter today, I think it was Eric the Banana, he said something, I just got such a kick out of it. He mentioned the big thing, and then he said, maybe she needs help with the spelling of the bigger words or something. I thought, how perfect, because that's where I'm sitting right now.
Well, actually, that brings me on to, I'm going to make this the last question, because we've been going at this for well over an hour, yes. So I thank you for your time. But I do have this one final question that I want your opinion on, and that is the Kathleen Zellner tweet where she says that she fully expects Judge Sukovich to not give them anything, and made me wonder. My mum always used to say to me that when it came to Christmas and birthday time, she would say to me, right, remember, he that expecteth nothing shall not be disappointed. Is it a case of Zellner's putting that out as if I'm not expecting anything, but if the pressure is so much on Judge Sukovich to do something about it, she might actually have no option other than to call for at least an evidentiary hearing.
Right.
Is there a possibility of that, do you think?
Eric, you want to handle that?
I personally would have, I don't know. I'm not here to second guess Zellner, but my gut feeling is I wish she wouldn't have made that tweet.
Yes.
Just because we don't need to continue. I mean, even though I know it doesn't really matter, it's probably pointless. I mean, Judge Suk is going to be Judge Suk. She's clearly, obviously biased. But saying things like that, I think, just seems like, it just
promotes a negative attitude.
Other people could interpret it in a way that they feel like she's being disrespectful. It bothers me the way that people could twist that tweet. and the meanings that they could try to extract or attach to that tweet by the way it is. And I would say the same thing where she asked again, where she put in again about having the judge recuse herself, having Judge Suk recuse herself, adding that into a recent motion. Kind of, you already asked once. I mean, I personally, my gut was, I wish that wasn't there. But then again, I'm not Zellner. I don't have 20 some odd exonerations under my belt. So, I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, look, you know what? The lady knows what she's doing. I trust her sensibility until she gives me a reason to feel otherwise. And, she's been digging up really interesting things. Everything else keeps coming, everything that comes out keeps cutting against the state continuously over and over again. So I'm inclined to sit back, but yeah, those did strike me. That tweet and asking for the recusal again was a little bit, it struck me as maybe that's not the best thing. But like I said, I'm not the one with 20 some odd exonerations under my belt. So
Sure.
For me, I kind of looked at it. I paused. I'm hoping that this is a strategy of reverse psychology. So I hope Zellner is like subliminally because Angie does everything the opposite what we want. So I feel like, from this is going to sound so stupid because I'm a woman, but from a woman's from that point of view, I feel like she was kind of being sarcastic. Like, we know you're not going to do anything anyway, so get it over with. Also, I'm hoping that the reason that she chose that method is basically because we do have an immense support group out here. We're all holding our breath. And rather than hold our breath till we turn blue, as you can obviously see they would leave us to do, I think Zellner was kind of like trying to lower our expectations so that we don't miss a beat in the support. Yeah. It doesn't suck the air out of the room, maybe. That's what I'm hoping. But I'm with you, Eric. It really felt a little disheartening. But at the same time, like you said, I agree with you. We just have to hope for the best. We know she's doing a fantastic job. And every day we look for a response, and hopefully we get something that surprises the hell out of all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I do apologize. I lied. I do have one more question. And this is the biggest question of them all. And
my favorite color is yellow. Okay, go ahead.
I can see that. So yes, basically, me and the dude, we agree on a lot. But we have had a major fallout over something.
Christ, you're not going to talk about Captain Crunch, are you?
Are you familiar with the breakfast cereal Captain Crunch?
Yes, I am. It's my favorite cereal of all times.
I love
it's very nice. I've had Captain Crunch. Now, the character Captain Crunch, we've
Captain Crunch is his name.
Captain Horatio Magellan.
Captain Horatio
Magellan Crunch. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You've seen the advert, the cartoons. What nationality is Captain Crunch?
I'm going to have to plead the fifth. I thank you guys very much. I have no way am I getting between the two of you on that one. No way. I am an advocator of pleading the fifth when you don't want to get yourself in that situation. I want to thank you guys both for doing this with me. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Been great.
We'll have to do it again soon. We do. If you don't mind, I'd like to make an announcement.
Absolutely. Yes.
Saturday Night Live, ma'am, this weekend, we're going to have Paul Capaldi on there. So if you want to tune in, that time would be from 7 till whenever. And it's PM US Central Time. So that'll be on the Ducky channel.
Yeah, look forward to that. Thank you very much.
This has been a blast. I've thoroughly enjoyed it very much.
Yeah.
Awesome. So talking to you as well.
So normally we finish off with the Erekose line. If you haven't done so already,
do it.
Please hit subscribe. But I'm going to finish off with the Ducky finish off, which is, if you didn't do the crime, you shouldn't do the time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers. Have a good night. Thank you.